Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We kick off this next session. Hopefully you haven't eaten too many pastries and I'm going to fall asleep during this one. And my name's Rick Brown. I'm the Deputy Director heading up the research at AIC. This session is really my experiences of working with criminal justice initiatives and evaluating criminal justice initiatives and working in the field on those kinds of issues. Now, I should say from the outset that what I'm going to talk about isn't AIC-based research, because I really wouldn't have much to talk about based on my 3 days at AIC. I started on Friday, been in the country about a week, so excuse me if I haven't quite picked up the language yet, and I've still got a lot to learn. Actually, this session today is as useful for me as it is for you in terms of finding out what goes on at AIC. What I'm going to talk about is really based on the last 20 years, some of the research that I've been doing in the UK. A lot of my work has been around evaluating different crime reduction initiatives, community safety initiatives, and work in the policing field, etc. So I'll pick up on some of those projects that I've worked on. But what I particularly want to do is kind of give a bit of a warts and all in terms of some of the real life experiences. Now this morning, Adam first thing talked about actually in the real world, things don't necessarily go the way that textbooks suggest, and some of that hopefully will come out during this session. So what I aim to do is really talk about kind of evaluation, and from kind of looking at three questions. What is evaluated? Why is it evaluated? And how is it evaluated? And particularly looking around kind of outcome evaluation issues. So to start with, I thought it would be useful just to kind of set the terms and discuss, well, what do we mean to start with by evaluation? And I think it's fair to say there's probably as many different definitions of evaluation as there are stars in the sky, but I've given just three here as examples. First one, systematic collection and analysis of data needed to make decisions. Second, a process for assessing in retrospect whether something has worked or is working as expected. And thirdly, the systematic determination of merit, worth, and significance of something using criteria against a set of standards. Now, I think what comes out when you look at the various definitions around evaluation is that there are certain commonalities that you can pick out. The first is that evaluation is an exercise you do in retrospect. You're generally looking back at what's gone on. Now, that may be within a context of ongoing evaluation where you're feeding into the next round of implementation to then improve that and then move on to the next stage of evaluation. But generally you're looking back to comment on what's already happened. It involves the collection and analysis of data. Almost by definition, that's part of the process of undertaking evaluation. But it's also important to recognise that the quality of the data that you sometimes have in evaluation research sometimes isn't under your control, because you may be using secondary data that's been collected by other agencies that may not have been necessarily collected for your purposes and may not necessarily give you quite what you need. So sometimes it's about making the best of what's available. Sometimes you're in the fortunate position of being able to collect data afresh, and the example of the Murray courts this morning was one where clearly the existing data systems weren't adequate, and they accepted the fact that additional data needs to be collected for the evaluation. But that's not always possible. Thirdly, evaluation focuses on an external entity from which the evaluators are often independent. You're generally evaluating something out there that's external to the evaluators. I say often because sometimes you do have scenarios in kind of action research, for example, where the evaluators may well be embedded within the project and it's difficult to differentiate the evaluators from the implementers. My experience is actually that they can be particularly problematic in terms of evaluators going native and actually being able to make independent assessments of what goes on. So generally, the evaluators will be kind of independent, coming in and evaluating a project or a program run by someone else. Next, and another commonality is that the findings from an evaluation should actually be useful and not just interesting. And I think that's really key. Is that, and I guess it's what interests me in particular is the applied nature of evaluation research and about making a difference. And it's not just to produce perhaps an academic article that gets published, although that's also nice to have. It's actually about seeing a difference made on the basis of your results. Invariably involves different stakeholders in the sense that generally there will be people that you will be evaluating who are implementing a program or project, and they may have their managers that are want to know whether this evaluation should continue, and there may well be external funders that are actually funding the initiative that you're evaluating too. And as a result of that, because you do have these different stakeholders, evaluation type research is inherently political. But I mean political generally with a small p, sometimes with a large p, but generally with a small p in the sense that you're going to be evaluating the work of others. And that invariably brings issues around making sure the research is as robust and has integrity, and that you stand by the research, as Adam mentioned this morning, to have those lines in the sand that you're not willing to cross in terms of the results you produce. So, I mean, I kind of set the scene really in terms of that's the sort of research that I'm going to be talking about for the rest of this session. It's the sort of research that I've particularly been involved in heavily in the UK. So what is evaluated? Many things can be evaluated, but generally they fall into one of these categories, and they're kind of, in a sense, hierarchical from the sort of top level down to ground level, and generally kind of moving from the most difficult to evaluate at the top down to the easier at the bottom. But first of all, you can evaluate strategies. So by strategies we mean something which may be a set of policies, initiatives or actions to address a particular problem. So for example, you may have a national strategy for tackling organised crime that's released by the government, and the evaluation may then explore whether the strategy has actually delivered on its aims and objectives. Or there may be a specific policy that you're evaluating, which may be a plan or course of action that's being followed. There, an example may be a policy by the police of how they deal with perpetrators of domestic violence, for example. When they turn up on the doorstep to a domestic dispute, how do they deal with it? Do they have a specific policy for arrest of the perpetrator in every occasion, for example? Next, programs. A program is generally a set of projects with a unifying theme. And I'll come on to talk in a minute about some research that I've done around arson reduction projects, wraps up within an arson reduction program. Next down, projects which are generally sets of actions or interventions that are aimed at dealing with specific problems. So, for example, you may have a particular restorative justice project that you're looking at and how that's being delivered. Then within a project, often you'll have interventions. So it may be that you're looking at a particular intervention. And by intervention, I mean activity with purpose. You're doing something with an intention to, so there's generally kind of some theory about why you're doing something to change a set of circumstances or to improve a set of circumstances. So for example, an intervention that may be within a burglary reduction project, which is again something I've worked on in the past, might be installing a burglar alarm, is a particular intervention with a theory about increasing the risk associated with detection for burglary. And then finally, I've had two occasions where I've been asked to actually evaluate people. Initially it was wrapped up as looking like a project in a sense that it had a series of actions that was being undertaken. When you looked at it, it was actually, this project was being delivered by one person, so it ended up actually an evaluation of individual people, which then obviously from the The political aspect is quite problematic because obviously that has a direct impact on those individuals. So I'm just really setting the scene that evaluation can fall into any of these kinds of categories. But what I'm going to be particularly focusing on for the rest of this presentation is really that middle field around programs, projects, and interventions, which have generally been the mainstream area that I've been working in. So, why are things evaluated? Now, it's fair to say that there are many reasons why projects, programs, interventions are evaluated. Some are positive, others less so. And I'll start with the positive reasons for evaluating. Ideally, it's to improve practice. So you evaluate a project, you see there are things that are working well, things that could be improved. You feed that back into practice. The stakeholders accept those and then build on your findings. Sometimes it's to find out if something has worked. So you've set up an initiative. You want to know, does it actually do what you expected it to? So again, the Murray Court example this morning, did it actually reduce offending by people going through the court was one of the outcomes. Clearly in that case, it didn't, but other outcomes were achieved. So, and often that's the case with a lot of the kinds of projects we look at. There's not necessarily a single outcome. Often there'll be multiple outcomes that projects will aim to achieve. It may also be about achieving value for money. You may well achieve a certain level of outcome, but at what expense have you achieved that? Could you actually justify continuing to run that project based on the outcomes that you've achieved?